We were talking about the future of data engineering. I think I want to keep this more conversational than the last panel we did in Sydney, where it was very kind of a circular round of questions and so forth. I also encourage you, if you have questions, please ask them. I want this to be participatory because I know it's kind of late and you're just eager to be a part of the conversation right now versus listening to people. So, what's the future of data engineering?
I'd say.
Okay. No, I think I don't know. I feel like some people want to like lean into the answer here is like, yeah, we're just gonna like use LLMs and ChatGPT and AI and RAG, and you just like vomit out like a bunch of buzzwords, right? That's what you guys want me to say right now. But at the same time, like I don't know, I feel like there's still a lot of the future in just SQL, Python, DBT, doing the fundamentals the right way, right? That stuff is still a lot of value there, right?
So is the future like mastering the fundamentals then?
I mean, yeah, the future is the past too. I mean, like everyone knows how many times have there been like SQL killers that they're like, oh, this is the thing that's gonna kill SQL, and then it's like, oh, look, SQL's been around for 50 years.
I think we're gonna go a bit like step up. Yeah. Let's say like in 5 years we're gonna talk about knowledge engineering more. Like we're gonna go more towards actually understanding the knowledge level.
What makes you say that?
I think the tech will help us sort of get more time for us to start thinking about the bigger issues that we actually are now tackling the tech part all the time. So maybe with Gen AI or other more productive ways of working might help us to focus on each other, focus on collaborating, focus on talking to people more.
What do you think, Ash?
I also think it's not even about the tech, right? Like, think 10 years ago and what the role of a data engineer did. I think I was called a systems analyst back then, and all we cared about was moving data out of an Oracle database with a SQL statement. Now, what a data engineer does day to day is going to change a lot. Like where I work, we care about metadata now when we do ingestion, not just moving the data in. The job's changing.
Let's bring up an interesting point. Like, what are you all seeing with data engineering? I'm guessing people from the Perth area, right? Or who's not from the Perth area, so I can ask a Perth specific question. I suppose, what do you feel like data engineering means in Perth? I'll have Ash be the ambassador for Perth data engineering, but like, what would you say is like, I would say sort of the average kind of day in life of an engineer, and then what's like the hottest thing you see in Perth?
Well, I might ask two questions, everyone. Raise your hand if you work for a resourcing company. Like, raise your hand if you work for a company that mostly lives in the cloud. I was kind of hoping for more people to say mining, because like, that was a big shock to me, coming from a cloud company to a mining company. Like, our problems as a data engineer are a lot different.
Yeah.
We have places where you have to do data engineering where they shut down power, less streaming. So I think it depends on where you work in Perth, on the problems you will have, but I don't know.
That's why I was kind of asking, because I think that as I've gone around the world a ton talking to data engineers, I realize like a lot of data engineering, the discussions are very local in context, because it depends on the types of companies you are and the culture you're in. I don't know there's a one-size-fits-all answer where like, we can't give the American answer because you're not in America and you don't operate the way we do. I mean, if we talk about big tech, you don't do those kind of things, so it's not a relevant answer to you, right? That's the one thing I've realized. It's very contextual, so I always want to kind of understand, like, who am I talking to here? Who are you? But Finland's interesting. I mean, when I was in Helsinki, I felt like I'd stumbled upon this tribe of some of the highest concentration of data talent in the world, and I didn't even realize it, like just in terms of knowledge and sophistication. So I thought it was interesting. But,
yeah, I mean, Finland it's interesting. There's like, that's similar to every country, that you have like more faster developing companies who are very data intensive, and then you have the more conservative companies that are moving slower. It's very interesting. I don't have like a one size fits all, even in Finland, like to say what it is going to be. I think it's going to be more like people will all have more data skills in the future, because it should be like more, like I think it's also a policy issue, like we should educate people more in data and in the skills, what it needs, like everybody in their work should understand the basics of data. So I think it's going to be more like data citizenship kind of thinking.
Yeah, cool. What do you think, Zach?
I mean, I think from another perspective, like what is the future in some regards is like, you just go back to like the 3 V's, right? You have volume, velocity, variety, right? It's like, it's probably going to be more data. Like, I think that's a fact that we can all agree on, that like the future will have more data, not less, right? And it's going to have more types of data, right? Variety. Like I think especially like the LLM ChatGPT world is like, well, what about video? What about text? What about PDFs? Like, can we turn that into tabular data so that we can then do our data engineering magic on it? And the answer is pretty much yes. I think that like the integration of AI models into data pipelines is going to be like inevitable. And then you have, the other one, velocity, right? Where it's like, okay, how can we get our data faster, quicker, real time, Kafka, right? The kind of like the blending of data engineering and software engineering, so that you have like these kind of real time systems that don't run once a day. They're just running all the time. And I think that the pushes, I think data engineering is going to push in all those directions. And we're able to do that because we're faster and more efficient because of things like Gen AI.
That's interesting. I guess, what are some of the things that you wish we would get over as an industry, particularly with data engineering? Like, I think that one thing that comes to my mind is sort of the challenges of working with the business, and that always seems to be the case. I don't know, is that one you want to pick apart for a second, or are there?
One thing I wish we would get over is that it's not an easy task to do. Like, I'm sure everyone here has worked with someone in the business. They'll come with like a big idea for a data product, but their budget is $20,000. And you kind of have to gently let them down that that's just not going to happen. And you feel like a bad person that they can't build that project. So
how do you handle that discussion for the audience? I'm sure it's kind of cheapskated on their deals.
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
How do I handle? I suppose it's internal politics in that case. Yeah, I probably won't speak too much about that, but it's really just helping them navigate the internal politics on how they may get the money different ways, different implementation like methodologies, maybe avoid the tier ones. Hope there's no tier ones here.
What's a tier one? That's not nomenclature.
I saw all of the labels, so I know none of them are here.
Okay.
Your McKinseys, your Deloittes, your PwC.
Okay.
You bang for your buck. Like it's just a different route. I think you need to go down. There's a lot of good talent in Perth. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. In your experience, Zach, what are some things you wish would have?
I mean, I think there's a couple things like at least like in like the Valley in San Francisco. Like I think there's a couple things there. Like I think that there's kind of like this push of like for example at Facebook, right? So at Facebook, there's 2 tracks, right? There is the engineering track, and then there's the individual contributor track, right? And so people like data analysts, data scientists, product manager, those people are on the individual contributor track. And you would think data engineer is on the engineering track. Engineer, it has in the title. It's not. It's actually on the individual contributor track. And that was one of the things, at least for me in San Francisco, is that like my belief is that data engineers are engineers. They are full engineers. That's what they are, right? And I think that that's one of the things that like we need to embrace more, is that idea of like building really high quality stuff. Because I honestly believe also at Facebook, there's a big push to like cut corners and not do quality work, because there's just all this pressure from the business to like give them data as quickly as possible, right? And then it's like, okay, like we should probably get over that and get better at saying like, hey, good things take time. Like it's better to build it once than to build it over.
And what would happen if you said good things take time at Facebook?
That's a good question. So if good things take time, I mean, I think for me, like, when I was there, like, I think now it would actually make a lot of sense. I mean, back then I was like very early in my career, and I didn't believe that was something that you could say. Right? I thought it was just like you need to just deliver what they ask you to deliver, right? And be a good engineer, right? But like
then you get burned out.
Yeah, I think that 100%. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah,
and that's why I left.
Yeah, that's what happened to me too. Like like you just want to like deliver and be good at your job, and the demand is just really a lot.
Is delivering the only thing that makes you good at your job?
I don't think so. I think that's actually one of the areas that is a great thing that we need to be thinking about as data engineers is like, if you guys Google data engineer burnout, if you just throw that into Google, like you're gonna get some really bad statistics, right? It says something like 80% or 90% of data engineers are experiencing burnout at any given moment. I'm like, I don't know if that's like feels a little bit high, but like, I mean, even if it's 50%, that's still too high, right? And so I think that's the whole idea is like delivery isn't the only thing. Like there's also judgment and discernment of like, you know, not giving stakeholders what they ask for, but giving them what they need.
And I find like from the business side, I think there can be some very domineering personalities who are used to pushing their and they're very good at communicating and sort of playing the game. And, you know, the engineer teams are like, you know, they are trying to sort of do their best. And like, you know, it always feels like this, like, you know, you're not doing good enough almost, because there's always some needs that are like really, everything is ASAP.
You're always behind.
Always. And then like, if you do choose like, okay, I'm going to cut corners here, I'm going to just make this ugly solution and I'm going to write a tech debt ticket about this and come back to it later, and you don't have that time later, then it's just like, then you're going to build a bad system. But should business wait for that engineering? I don't know, like there should be a time to fix that better. Maybe the business shouldn't wait for all that engineering time. So I'm trying to think like maybe there's like some kind of a middle ground. Like we can give like the POC or like MVP version, and then we just use that time to fix it better when the business is looking through the data, maybe.
More on the analytics side, someone once said to me, do you want a fast answer or a right answer? So it's, because who's built a dashboard before, and by the time you finish it, you go back to the person in the business and they no longer care about it anymore. So I think that's something I usually weigh up in my head as well. It's like fast or right, kind of control you on how much effort you spend in it.
Well, it's the old story of the drunkard looking for his keys. Have you heard this one?
No.
Well, as the story goes, there's a drunk guy on the street late at night looking for his keys under the stoplight or a street light, and a cop comes up to him and tries to help him. And he's like, well, where did you actually put your keys? And he's like, well, they're over in my car over there. And he's like, well, why are you looking for them here? Well, it's because the light's brighter over here, so that's that's where I'm going to look, right? But I think you can draw some parallels to probably a lot of your own circumstances from that. Yeah.
Just hang on, I'll bring you.
Oh, thanks, Lars.
I can talk really loud, so.
No.
Yeah.
But not as loud as you can in a bit.
With a mic, right?
I suppose the question is data engineering. What would you say is data engineering versus what is not in the space of data and digital everything? And also, does it feel like the definition of what is data engineering is changing? So what is it? What isn't it? Is it static or is it changing?
I mean, I wrote a book on data engineering.
I plan to read that book.
It's probably, I don't know if it's the industry standard definition, but I think it is now. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about the lifecycle management of data while making it secure, well-governed, well-orchestrated, and so forth. It's the bottom line. You get data from somewhere, you do something with it, and you make it useful for downstream stakeholders.
If I'm a data engineer and I've been handed an app and I'm told to tune the back end of an app and the database, is that a data engineer job?
Ooh, I have a good one on that. That is literally, that was my entire dilemma when I worked at Netflix, right? Because when I was there, initially I was like writing pipelines, and then eventually they were like, hey, build this REST API. And I was like, okay. And I did it because I'm hungry, right? I'm hungry. I want to build a technical person. I want to just
You can't say no.
Yeah, I can't say no, exactly. And so one of the things that there was an emergence of another role there. So eventually I negotiated with my manager because I was like, hey, I am on call for this REST API. this is not data engineering. Because I was like, I look at all the other people on the team. None of them own online systems. I'm the only one who owns an online system. So and they actually changed my job title because I was adamant about that. And so they changed my job title from data engineer to software engineer, data. So it's like a different job title, right? And so it's not data engineering, but it's like kind of data engineering, right?
I think that's a confusion some people have. Like people come to our team, they're like, any word data, they'll come to the data team. But it's like so many different types of data. So integrations, data engineering, back-end data engineering. It is confusing, I suppose, for the business.
It is, and I think that the title data engineer really came about as a result of the popularity of data science. But as Zach points out, and as Ash points out, it's kind of like these, in some way, shape, or form, these roles have always existed, right? I mean, if you're getting into an app database and you're maybe getting data out of it, but you're doing quote data stuff to it. Like what exactly does? Yeah, tune the database, sure. Yeah, and then that
Platform engineer.
Then that used to be a DBA back in the day, right? And that was, but that's been around, 50 years, right? So, I mean, titles come and go, but what I did see in the 2010s was more of a convergence of title. I mean, I remember when data science first came out as a title. And that, I think, was back in the day, we're talking kind of late 2000s, early 2010s, but that was equivocated with machine learning, I think, more than anything. But then because companies want to recruit new hires, you're going to use data scientist because it's the sexiest job. I remember being an analyst was like a dog shit title for a long time. Like you couldn't, if you were an analyst in the 2010s, especially the early 2010s, it's like you may as well have had, bottom 12 hole. You have a business mullet, like you just like it's not a cool look, right? But then analysts became data scientists, right? And so job descriptions started being, well, you can be good at Excel and be a data scientist, like I suppose. And then BI became data scientists and so forth. But data engineering is sort of the same thing, where I think it became an agglomeration of different roles in the past: ETL developer, BI, software engineer, data, like all this stuff, right? But it's just that's how roles are. Like if you're gonna hire for somebody doing quote data engineering work, you're not gonna put software engineer, data. Yeah. You probably want to put data engineering. Like you didn't come up with like software engineer, .io for your website. Like that doesn't have quite the same.
It'd be a cheap domain though.
Let's book it right. Somebody's gonna get it before you do. So but I think you need to look at the actions you're doing for the job, not just what the title is, because I mean. Even when writing the book, I think the hard part was figuring out, okay, so what are the clean lines of demarcation that you could potentially describe data engineering as being? That's a mental construct I think that we came up with, where no matter what circumstance, it's sort of, you're aligned to like serving data for analytics, quote, data science, machine learning use cases, right? But that's really it, and you're getting data from somewhere to facilitate that. Does this role exist in the future? I don't know. I mean, most roles come and go, right? It might be the fundamentals of software engineering / data at some point, and that's how it is, but roles come and go. Zan, if you had a question.
Just hang on.
Good job, Lars. Fit.
About the same topic of what's the role of data engineering, I think there's a lot of talk about data mesh and how domains will take ownership of their own data. But as data mesh becomes more of, I guess, a trend, how do you see like roles of software engineering taking ownership of dealing with their own data? Because it is the data that is produced by them, and then they take ownership of like creating the data products as well. How do you see the overlap between data engineering and software engineering in the future?
I'm talking this one, but well, you were asking Mac Degani herself what happens. It's the data role goes away. Is what happens. Yeah. But she comes from a software background. But what that means is her whole vision was sort of, why do we have these false demarcations between applications, data, and all these other things if we're at the end delivering a domain, quote, data product, right? These are sort of artificial lines where really you have teams that are probably good at everything. Sort of what I described in the MMA talk, where that was sort of the notion of it, is you're delivering a data product, but you have to be cognizant of all the different aspects of delivering that product. But I think in her vision of the world, these data roles change. I don't think they exist under what she prescribes.
I have an anecdote here about just my time at Netflix. So when I was building out this REST API for Netflix, which was for asset inventory. So it's a giant graph database of like how Netflix is, they have that, they're kind of notorious for that microservices, right? Where they have like, Netflix is not one app, it's actually 8,000 apps all that talk to one another. And so one of the things that's an absolute nightmare about that is security, because any one of those can be hacked. And there's like, so measuring security in a microservice architecture is very complicated. And so one of the things was I built this REST API, and I had a bunch of of data pipelines that fed into it. And then ultimately, like, we actually gave it to the cybersecurity team because it was not like, that's not our domain. That's not like, I mean, like, we didn't know how to make it better, right? Because it's like, we don't know how to measure threats. Like, we're data people, right? That's just not our domain, right? And so ultimately, that was not a product that we, like, data engineers can be instrumental in like kind of setting up like a good foundation there. But a lot of times, like, the continued iteration on it is like some other team, right? In some other place. And that can be definitely one of the things that like I was like really surprised by, that they were able to pick it up and just go with it though, right? And so there can be cases like that where data mesh, or like where the domain people who are not necessarily data people can actually do a better job than we can, because it's just like, that's their domain. That's what they eat, you know, sleep and breathe.
I also see this trend like more like these niche data engineers, sort of like data product engineer, analytics engineer, data quality engineer. These are like, it's getting more mature, I guess, the field. So, and it's also like, even the recruiters and management are starting to understand the field better. So it's easier to recruit for that demand, maybe.
Yeah, I think analytics engineer is a really important one, especially as things kind of evolve, where it's like that domain knowledge of getting closer to the business and understanding the actual problems that are happening.
Yes.
That's where, and then you can determine what you need to do next, and kind of being a little bit more autonomous in that way. That's where analytics engineering is going to be really hot.
I'm seeing this trend as well, like analysts getting really empowered when they learn to program, and getting that power back from, they're not relying on the data engineers anymore because they don't have to. And I think that's very good.
Yeah, we haven't really adopted the term of like analytics engineer, but one thing I find interesting and enjoy doing is finding those people in the business that are doing data and kind of unofficially converting them to those analytics engineers. Mm-hmm. So they may be working in Excel or like in Power BI, whatever, but plugging them into our platform team to become like better. And as John said it, putting them on, you know, the paved road because they're currently off on the gravel. Yeah.
And I think our role is also to encourage that, because like sometimes it's like, oh, I'd be curious to learn, but nobody is really like giving the opportunity or like a little bit push that or that permission to do that. So these are some signs that should be looked after.
You used an interesting term, domain. So in the context of data mesh, it takes its lineage from what was it, domain-driven design from back in the day, right? So it was from 2003 that was published. And so that it's interesting because I think, who's heard of domain-driven design? Just out of curiosity. So about maybe 16% of people. I just made that number up actually. It's not nice round numbers. 1/6. Yeah, so I mean, but it's interesting because the data mesh thinking directly maps to the domain-driven patterns, right? No pun intended with a mapping reference to domains. It's a math joke. But so I'm curious because that's something where in software engineering, I think it's gotten some traction, but it's also one of these things where if you talk to a lot of software engineers, I think they sort of implicitly understand things like bounded contexts, which is basically what's the area of the business you're trying to describe using a quote ubiquitous language, right? So you work with domain experts to build an application that's suited for the business. This is kind of where microservices actually came from. It was exactly this, which is where data mesh came from, right? But it's that thinking that I see sort of missing from when in the discussions that data people have with the business. I think that's the one thing where we're not really translating that well, because it's, if you were to take a true data product approach, you'd be focusing on the domain that you're trying to model and build a product for. But I think we're all too often focused on how can we shoehorn in, say, this business grouping into like a dimension table or a fact, right? And these aren't direct mappings when you try and model them. So I think it's one of the cruxes is we're stuck with this kind of language that we have, where we have a very engineering-centric thing, like let's build a pipeline for this service, but a service is not a domain in the context that Eric Evans described it, domain. So it's an interesting discussion. That's where I think is like that going to be the hang-up for data mesh is like, I think if you want to make these mappings to data products, there's actually a lot of things that need to happen, like in how we talk about problems and look at the world. I don't think we're there yet.
And actually, like, what is data product? Like, it should be a business question, like something to answer like a business question with. I think that knowledge is something that we need to also drive.
Hi. Hold on. Don't say anything, Lars.
No, I was asleep.
So just now we talk about the, some of the company move from the centralized to decentralized. We talk about data mesh. And just wondering, so I think this part, the enterprise data governance become really crucial as if the company move to the data mesh. So how we enforce the governance rules across all these kind of different domain, and especially when we talk about the data quality, and we all maybe to the different business unit, and then we have a different definition of the quality of the data, and also how we capture the data lineage. Yeah, that's pretty much.
You're using it in the context of data mesh. It's not solved yet. Nobody's done it.
I was about to say, I have a strong opinion on this, and there is no technology to solve this problem. It's a people problem. I think the industry has been bouncing from centralized to decentralized for years. And I think there's a sweet spot in the middle where it's decentralized, but there's that central forum or committee that's setting those standards and sort of federating it out. But how do you enforce it? Like, I'm a big fan of automation. So if you can remove human from the governance, then do that.
I think a big thing also, like centralized versus decentralized, is like how, like, say you have a certain metric, like how used is that metric throughout the company? Is this something that 10 teams use, 15 teams use? Is this something that's localized to one team? Because if it's localized to one team, like, let them have whatever data quality they want, right? Because it's like, there's not going to be that whole thing of like, well, my numbers don't match your numbers because there's only one number. And it might be a bad number, but at least they have something, right? And it's like, and there is that people problem of like, okay, we need to have that best practices of like getting everyone on board. Because I know that was one of the things that they did at Netflix. They had this like, in like the studio space, right? They had this thing called they have citizen developers, right? Which is essentially like someone who works in the studio space where they're like all about shooting movies, but they know like a little bit about Airtable, they might know a little bit of Python, they know like just enough to like move data around, but like they don't know any of the best practices, right? And but like a lot of times that is fine. And I think that's one of the things that like we don't want to be too religious about like data quality, because sometimes like even if the data quality isn't perfect, if it's better than like shooting from the hip and just being like, oh, well, just using your intuition when making decisions, right? And that's I think that's one of the things that like is if you're going with data mesh and you're going with like decentralized ownership for people who don't have data expertise, you can't expect them to have data expertise, right? That's like of like data quality, all the checks, like all that stuff. That's just like that's the whole point of doing that architecture. Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking like also like this mixed Marshall data mesh, in a way, like use what you need, know. Mm-hmm. I think, there are good qualities, have some parts centralized, because like if many business units are using, like you said about the metrics, like if many business units are using this like basic facts, or let's say about customers or something like this, it's a shared thing, that could be centralized, but then some of them could be like their own products that is only that domain uses. So like common sense, uncommon sense, I don't know what it is.
I would pay attention though. So I think there's a couple of things happening with so one aspect of data mesh is a federated computational compute layer that goes sort of across, and that's the governance layer and a bunch of other stuff. But like it was interesting. So Jamak's obviously working on that with Next. So she's building basically this data OS that makes data portable. And for sharing, and I think that's an interesting development. We were actually meeting with Martin Kleppmann last week, if you know who he is. He wrote Design Data Intensive Applications, but he's working on an interesting project, local first databases. And so it's a decentralized protocol, basically, for anybody to do, say, Google Docs collaboration, but on their own device without an intermediary. And I think that things like this are going to form the basis for, I think, what we're all looking for the decentralized protocol, but that's being actively worked on. I know that when I asked him, he intends to, I think, make that some sort of a standard protocol. But you need this decentralized way of operating. First, we don't really have that yet. But another thing that is actually, who is it? Ole Olsen Bagnu from the Netherlands is working on this thing called the metagrid, which is a metadata repository. And I think this is also one of the missing links to making the data quality checks work across in a decentralized fashion, right? So I think that so you're seeing this is sort of like, I think, a cousin to what data mesh is, but if you can picture semantic reliability in a decentralized way, these are some of the undercurrents that are currently being worked on. Where it goes from here, time will tell, but we're not there yet.
And I think one of the other things that is an interesting development in this whole data mesh space is that like some of this data quality stuff should be able to be facilitated by LLM and Gen AI, and being like, hey, like where you can just prompt it and be like, okay, I wrote this pipeline, now give me the quality checks, right? And that's like something that can be just put into the pipeline, like kind of in a more AI driven way.
And use the boilerplates.
Yeah, 100%. Jesus. Great engagement.
He's closest, but then he had his hand up second over there. He was first, second, and then I see at light speed what happens.
Yeah.
Kidding.
That's good.
Yeah, Ash was talking about how you can locate users in the business who have a really good understanding, who are more technically inclined, and get them in like an analytics engineer kind of equivalent position. I've seen that happen in the past, and then that person finds a new job, they're in a non-technical team, suddenly there's a massive gap in all the capabilities that were there prior to their departure. How do you handle that from not becoming just taking on that person's work as the data engineering team?
Oh, I don't even know how to start to answer that question, to be completely honest. Does anyone else want to have a shot at answering that question?
Well, I think part of it is that you shouldn't fear upskilling your employees. Like, I think that's part of it is like, encouraging your employees to take more responsibility does come with more risk, because then it's like, okay, like how do I replace this unicorn person, right? That's like, I think that's like a trade-off, but at the same time, you don't want to like have your employees be like, here is your tiny box, right? And we don't want you to have a bigger box, because if you leave, it'll be harder to fill the bigger box, right? And I think that that's a perspective there is that like the whole industry is going to be thinking about this, and that like I think the perspective to be thinking here is more like, if you're not doing that, right, then if you're not upskilling your employees, then they're going to leave, right? And then there's going to be more turnover. So hopefully the idea would be that like if you are giving them bigger challenges and you are giving them more opportunity, that's actually going to increase retention. It's actually going to keep them around longer, and they're going to be more valuable to you. And that, like, obviously you have the downside risk there. I know for sure I've been in that position in big tech where like I was owning way too many things, and then I left, and then in my 2 weeks notice, I was like, wow, like I'm owning way too much. I can see that like they're probably going to need to hire 2 or 3 people to like take over what I was doing. But like, the rest of the industry is going to be doing this as well, right? And because if they're not, the people in the industry who aren't doing this are going to become irrelevant. Like that's just the nature of the beast. The industry is changing. So like hopefully that would be the gap would be filled by another company that's also upskilling their person, and then you can grab that person who also has the same kind of complementary skill set.
And also have those knowledge banks like wikis to share
for sure,
the knowledge.
Yeah. Tribal knowledge. Yeah. Tribal knowledge needs to not be in the heads of like one engineer.
It's such a risk.
And it's not just about turning people in the business into full-on data engineers as well. It's just finding out, like, you know, what are they doing super slow and repetitive. So it's really just going to them with that value proposition to say, like, you can do your job like faster and spend more time doing your actual job.
I'll give you an example where this actually didn't work really well at all.
Amazing.
I had a client that was stuck on this like 1980s era DB2 mainframe, real sexy stuff. And the guy who built it from the 80s, starting in the 80s, all the way to maybe, we'll call it 2017 or whatever, it was basically one person. He didn't document any code. He didn't leave comments. It was all up here. And he showed up to stand up like every day. And then there was one day he didn't show up. And then that turned into 5 days. And then we realized that he passed away. And that sucked. And that's the beginning of the horror story that ensued. So because there was no documentation and nobody knew how to run this thing, apparently he was doing things behind the scenes to keep it running. And this is running about $1 billion in revenue, this system. And then it breaks. There's nobody who understands how it works.
Everyone in the room has a similar story, I would imagine.
Yeah, sure. But this is, I'd say this isn't uncommon. Maybe it's not somebody passing away, but this is a good example of like the anti-pattern where like you just somehow entrusted this person to run it into perpetuity, then they ran themselves into perpetuity, and here we are. So that's, so I'd say like build in redundancies, build in education, level people up. That's, I think for a lot of reasons is a good idea. That's an extreme example of where people took their eye off the ball and things happen. But that the system was down, and that cost them, for every hour it was down, it cost them 24 hours to get back up, and I don't even know how many customers they lost as a result. You had a question.
Thanks. In the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of focus on interoperability, things like table formats, catalogs. Where would you like to see more interoperability, technology or otherwise?
Well, I know one of the technologies that I'm really bullish on is a technology called IBIS. IBIS is a way that you can write, it's like a single data frame API, and then you can essentially pick what execution engine you want it to be, like whether it be like Pandas, Polars, Spark. So, because I mean, a lot of that stuff is the same stuff, right? And so you should be able to like write your data frame code one time and just be able to use it. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about technologies like IBIS that are really good, especially in terms of like migrating and optionality and stuff like that. I think that stuff is really great. Open table format stuff, also very bullish on Iceberg. I think Iceberg is the future in a lot of ways. And all those things where it's like, we should be able to just like have one place where we have all our data, right? We don't have to like do all this like cross like data lake, database like format stuff and doing all these cross system queries, right? That's what Trino tried to do, right? Trino was all about like, oh, you can just query everything at the same time, right? And it's like, then people are like, wait a minute, like, why don't we just put everything in one spot? And then that's probably easier. So I think like, I think another spot that I would like interoperability is, it comes back to like, it's a little bit different, is like the idea of like, you own your data. Like one of the things I've always thought is like, that is really like tragic is like, I like Spotify, right? Spotify is great. What if I don't want to be on Spotify, right? But I have like this 15 years of listening history that like is this personalization data. Or I can go and choose to go to like YouTube Music and like start over, right? And it's like, that just seems like, I mean, I do the same thing with my wearable. Like with my wearable, like I really want an Apple Watch, but at 6 years on Fitbit, right? And I'm not gonna like give up this data to like go to Apple Watch, right? And it's like, I think that though there's gonna be more formats like that for different places so that like you own your data and then you can like import your recommendations into other platforms. I think that's definitely...
Yeah, data ownership is gonna be...
Yeah, that's gonna be exciting.
And also in healthcare in Europe, there's EHDS, like European Health Data Space, that we want to like start building more interoperability. So that's like on a domain level, but that's very interesting to have like all the countries sort of be able to share knowledge.
I'd like to see more interoperability with like security on all of it. It's great that, Databricks open sourced Unity recently as well. What was Iceberg's one? Was it Polaris or something as well? So there's disconnect in security, which I think will help with the data mesh architecture go forward.
Got a question over here. Just to kind of extend on that question, I'm sure you guys have heard of things like OTel, and I think we were talking before about their consumer data rights with the ACCC. Do you see something like that appearing for data so that every company has a common standard that they're writing their data to, so if you want to export or whatever, it's interoperable between platforms and companies and products?
I think there's a lot of companies out there trying to do that. Like the one that comes to mind is like the open data product specification, where they're defining a consistent product specification which companies can share to share. But I think that's more aimed at more like data marketplaces. But I think that's the start of that. Yeah.
I think you got to look at the reasons why companies wouldn't want to do this too, right? Like, what vested interest would you have to keep a walled garden and not provide some way of sharing? So, I mean, there's a notion of data gravity, for example, which most vendors will tell you about. Like, it's amazing. Well, the salespeople behind the scenes will say that data gravity is amazing because your data is kept in the walled garden and it can't get out. Egress fees are one symptom of that. If you ever try to move data out of a cloud, until recently. Now, if you try and migrate out, I think legally, like, they have to basically let you do that for free. But moving data between clouds is, or even between AZs, pretty expensive. So yeah, well, I think I would flip the question and ask like, why wouldn't it work, right? Because I think that's kind of where you'd want to start. Like, what are the incentives for companies to prevent that from happening? And I think there's a lot. So.
Data is the oil. It's not like we're not just going to open spigots to everybody, right? Yeah.
I've seen a scenario where Spotify would like say, Zach, you're welcome to go to Apple Music with your data. That's great. Or Beatport, or whatever you want to do.
Right.
It would, same with Netflix. Would Netflix like let you move all your? Well, that's a bit different because you have movie rights and everything between the studios. And it's a game of whack-a-mole. But on a related note too, the thing I think the modern data stack. Who's heard of the modern data stack?
Yeah.
Not as many people raising their hands, unless you're just kind of nodding like, yeah, I heard of that. But I mean, that was, I think, a good example. So that was basically, it's interesting because that was almost a vendor-created enigma, right? Where it was like, I think the canonical one was, your data source here, and then it's like Fivetran gets it out, puts it in Snowflake, dbt runs the transformations, you do your visualization in Looker or Mode or something like that. So it's kind of this hipster data stack. But it was all a bunch of names. But the thing is, none of these things had interoperability with any other products in the ecosystem. So what you had was an incredibly fragmented and non-interoperable ecosystem where nothing worked with anything else. And I think that was one of the downfalls of the modern data stack. Was it you were stuck inside walled gardens of tools. To me, that doesn't seem modern, but that just seems like kind of what we've always had. I always joked with my business partner that at the end of the day, everything becomes Informatica. So, i.e., you have a monolithic workflow, and that's sort of what the industry built for itself inadvertently with the modern data stack, I feel. That's a nice tirade. What other questions do you have? I think we have like 7 minutes, so.
Hopefully an easy one. In the last 10, 12 years, we've seen a massive proliferation of tools, whether it be coordination, storage, computing stuff. Do you think over the next 5 years we'll start to see more and more winners and losers of that space, or we just have more and more technologies becoming available for our toolbox?
Like I said, I think everything becomes Informatica at the end of the day. What do you guys think, though?
I think the money is going to run out with many companies because there will be companies who win. Somebody has to lose.
I think that, like, at the same time, I think over the last 10, 12 years, there's also been a consolidation of tools. I actually think that both have happened. Because, like, who's still writing pig jobs, right? Who's still writing Hive jobs, right? And there's, like, and even the Hive Metastore. I think that the Hive Metastore was the one that I was like, that one's been around, dude. That one's been around for a long time, right? I was like, I really underestimated how long the Hive Metastore was going to stick around.
It's like shag carpet. It's like everywhere.
Timeless, right? Yeah. And so like, I think in some regards, like that initial like big data boom of like Hadoop and all those tools, those have like kind of collapsed down into like, now there's like essentially like maybe one or two players in each of the, compute storage kind of spaces. And but yeah, I think now, like, because of everything's more in the cloud, it's easier to build your own tool too, right? You can go and like set up your own stuff. It's like it's not like 15 years ago it was a lot more work to do that. So I think in that way, it's like the bar to build a new data tool is lower. So that's also something that like I think there's like competing priorities there in terms of like, oh, we can do it better, right? And I definitely think that there is going to be more stuff, especially like if you're thinking about like how things are going to change in like distributed compute, like things like moving things to Rust, like because I think the JVM is definitely shaky, and then also moving things to like GPUs, right? If you've seen like Photon with Databricks, that stuff's pretty cool.
But I think a lot of people built those modern data stacks because they wanted the Ferrari for each composable part. But now that like the Databricks and Snowflakes, they're offering it all now, and people are starting to realize that they're okay having a Camry. Like, and they still keep bits and pieces of it. So I think until something new comes out, which I don't know what it is, like they're just going to stick with the Camry.
And I've always been stunned, especially with Spark, right? Because I've written pipelines with Spark that are doing like multiple petabytes a day, right? It's like, how much more scale do we need? You know, it's like Spark essentially goes as wide as you want it to go, right? And so it's like maybe we can make it more efficient, but like it's kind of solved the problem. It solved the chunk up, you know, take a lot of data, put it into small pieces, and then process it, right? That's like it solved that problem. So.
And not even many companies need Spark.
Yeah, 100%.
Who's seen Matt Turk's, who's seen the Matt Turk, the Mad Data Landscape slide, the one with all the categories of products and then the vendors?
Yeah.
You've seen some variation of this? I think the latest one that came out earlier this year was like, what, 2,100 logos or something?
Yeah, I'm trying to get my logo on there, 100%.
My logo's on there.
Next year.
But I mean, it's interesting because it feels like that's, if you look at each category, for example, right? I mean, this is like sort of peak ZERP behavior where in data observability, there's dozens of companies, and that's just one category. But what you're starting to see, you know, as I travel the world, you know, talking to friends who run these companies, it's, you know, I think there's winners that are becoming apparent in each category, and then the ones that are not in the top three, we'll find out what happens. But the thing is, it's harder to raise money. Like if you're not an AI company today, if you don't have AI on your name,
AI power.
it's like harder. It's so much harder to raise money, right? And you're going to get pretty shit terms. And so that's and the thing is, if you raise money in 2020, 2021, your runway's running out right now. So you're gonna have to find ways to cut costs, recapitalize, et cetera, often at terms that you're gonna really hate yourself for doing. This is a discussion that's happening right now. If you're not in the top three of the category, this is a conversation you're having right now, and it sucks. You know, nobody wants to talk about this, but it's the reality. Most of those companies that you see on those landscapes aren't going to be around. They're all going to be replaced by AI companies. And then the thing is, they're going to have the same problem because this is how funding cycles work. You know, boom and bust cycles. This is how it's been since, you know, the dawn of time. But I think there's going to be less tooling in the future, but replaced by something else. So
I think collaborative tools are the key. Like I think, like I work a lot with Databricks, but that works because it's a collaborative space where you can work with analysts, machine learning engineers, and data engineers, and you have a common catalog. So I think somewhat this is probably, I don't know, but I've seen that trending now, that having that one platform.
we have time for one more short question.
We got one down the back here.
Hi. What is your opinion about the data fabric which is going around right now in the market? Is it okay to compare it with data mesh, or is it a separate entity? How do you want to say things about it?
Data fabric was invented by Gartner to. It's a bullshit term.
What do you guys think?
I think Microsoft confused it even more by releasing Fabric. To be completely honest with you, because people ask me the same thing, like, what is Fabric? And I think it's again a buzzword business term.
I think it's
say.
Marketing, and I heard that it should not probably have been on general availability as soon as it was.
Oh, I didn't mean to turn the story.
You just got it. You nailed it, dude.
Yeah, they didn't sponsor this event, so it's okay.
We answer your question?
Do you want to do one more? Or are we done?
We got one more. No, that was not a good answer. Yeah, give him a chance.
We have about like 1 minute.
Just so everybody knows, he's going to be holding you up from afternoon tea.
Good.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I have very generic questions. So is AI going to replace the data engineers? If yes, how? If no, why?
I think it's going to make us even more required. Like, it's my answer.
Well,
yeah.
and like I get this question literally every single day on all my channels, essentially, literally every single day. And I think that you always have to think about this in terms of like when. Like when is it is a matter of when. It is a matter of when. What, like in 50 years? Like I don't know. Like we don't know, right? You have no idea where things are going, right? So it's like. I think that like having a time frame in mind of like what's going to happen over the next 5, 10, 20 years is like something to be thinking about that like is important. I think that things are going to change a lot, and like that like the data engineer title, like what Joe was saying earlier, is like it might go away, right? And it might be something new, right? And the responsibilities will change. But like I also just feel like, you know, if you are a data literate person, you know, data is the intelligence of AI. Right, so it's like if you know how to work with intelligence and feed AI and teach AI, right, with good quality data, I feel like that idea is going to have a very long shelf life. That's an idea that's going to stick around for a long time.
And I think people should think of themselves as like companies. We need to stay competitive, and whatever is happening around us, we need to be competitive in that space, and we need to adapt, keep adapting. Let's not think about titles.
And in the short term, how can you use AI to become a better data engineer?
Yeah.
My answer is short term, it won't go away. Long term, it will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.